Now what the hell do you think you're doing with that tin star, boy?
Watch that boy shit, redneck. You talking to the sheriff of Rock Ridge.
There are movies that make you laugh, and then there are movies that change the way you think about laughter itself. Blazing Saddles is the second kind. Released in 1974, Mel Brooks's Western satire shattered comedic conventions, tackled racial politics with a sledgehammer wrapped in a joke, and somehow managed to be both wildly offensive and morally courageous at the same time. Audiences packed theaters. Critics scrambled for vocabulary. And decades later, the film still holds up as one of the most daring comedies ever put on celluloid. But here is the thing that most people, even devoted fans who can recite the dialogue by heart, have never fully reckoned with. The secret ingredient was not the outrageous script, not the controversy, and not even Mel Brooks's anarchic direction. It was a quiet man sitting in a jail cell, barely trying, and somehow stealing every single scene he was in. Gene Wilder's performance as the Waco Kid is one of the most misunderstood achievements in American comedy, and what Wilder himself later revealed about how and why he played the role the way he did reframes the entire film in a way that is genuinely startling. To understand what Wilder brought to Blazing Saddles, you first have to understand how he got there, because the story behind his casting is almost as remarkable as the performance itself. The role of the Waco Kid was never originally written for Gene Wilder. Mel Brooks had cast Gig Young, a respected Hollywood actor with an Oscar to his name, as the aging, broken-down gunslinger who becomes Sheriff Bart's unlikely ally. On paper, it made sense. Young had gravitas, experience, and the kind of weathered dignity the role seemed to require. But on the very first day of shooting, everything fell apart. Young appeared on set visibly unwell, shaking and disoriented, showing signs of acute alcohol withdrawal so severe that he collapsed before the morning was out. Production ground to a halt. Brooks was suddenly without a leading supporting actor with cameras already rolling and a studio watching every dollar. What Brooks did next says everything about his relationship with Gene Wilder. He did not call an agent. He did not hold emergency auditions. He picked up the phone and called Wilder directly, a man he had worked with and trusted since the two had collaborated on The Producers years earlier. What is remarkable about Wilder's response is how unconditional it was. By multiple accounts, he did not ask to read the script. He did not negotiate his fee. He did not request a detailed description of the character. He simply said yes, and he was on a plane the next day. This was not a calculated career move. This was loyalty, and perhaps something more, an instinct that this was a project worth showing up for, fully and without hesitation. Wilder arrived on set within 24 hours, jet-lagged and underprepared by any conventional standard. Most actors spend weeks or months inhabiting a character before cameras roll. Wilder had hours. And yet, by the time filming began, something remarkable happened. He was already there, already fully inside the Waco Kid, in a way that seemed almost inexplicable to those watching. What he did next, however, is where the real story begins. Before the cameras rolled on his first scene, Wilder made a demand that surprised everyone on set. He told Mel Brooks, plainly and directly, that he would not play the character for laughs. Read that again. In one of the most aggressively comedic films of the entire decade, Gene Wilder sat down with the director and said, in effect, I am not going to try to be funny. Brooks agreed. And that agreement changed the entire film. What Wilder understood, with a kind of intuitive clarity that separates genuinely great performers from merely talented ones, was that the Waco Kid only worked if he was real. The film surrounding him was cartoonish, deliberately and brilliantly so. Characters like Hedley Lamar were grand operatic villains played at maximum volume. The townspeople were walking caricatures. The fourth wall was not just broken but demolished. Into this controlled chaos, Wilder introduced something that no one had scripted and no one could quite manufacture: stillness. His Waco Kid was a man who had seen everything, survived everything, and come out the other side not triumphant but hollow. The trembling hands were not played for comedy. The detached, half-present way he delivered his lines was not an affectation. Wilder chose to treat the kid's alcoholism and emotional wreckage as genuine trauma, the kind of damage that does not announce itself loudly but leaks out quietly around the edges of a person. In the famous jailhouse scene, when the kid describes once being the fastest gun in the West, there is no pride in Wilder's voice. There is no nostalgia. There is only a man confessing something he would rather not think about, and the effect is oddly devastating in the middle of what is ostensibly a broad farce. Mel Brooks later confirmed what viewers who have revisited the film have sensed for years, that Wilder brought an emotional intelligence to the Waco Kid that was never written into the script. He was not improvising jokes. He was excavating a human being and playing that human being with absolute seriousness, trusting that the comedy of the situation would take care of itself. The technical genius of this approach becomes clear when you think about how comedy actually works. A joke lands harder when someone in the room is not laughing. Absurdity registers more powerfully when measured against something grounded and real. Wilder instinctively grasped this principle and applied it with surgical precision. Every scene he shared with Cleveland Little's Sheriff Bart crackled with a particular energy, not because Wilder was matching Little's charisma and energy, but because he was doing the opposite. He was listening. He was reacting rather than performing. He was being the still point around which everything else moved. This is extraordinarily difficult to do. Restraint in comedy is not the same as passivity. Wilder was never absent from a scene. His eyes were always doing something, registering something, communicating something that his words deliberately left out. When he delivered lines like his understated observation about the townspeople being simple, common clay, people of the land, before pausing and quietly adding a word that demolished the entire sentiment, the humor came entirely from the gap between his serene delivery and the content of what he was actually saying. He was not winking at the audience. He was not telegraphing the punchline. He simply said it, as if it were the most natural observation in the world, and the effect was incendiary. Crew members who were present on set have described how difficult it was to get clean takes during Wilder's scenes, not because of anything Wilder did wrong, but because his delivery was so precisely calibrated and so unexpectedly landed that camera operators and sound technicians would burst out laughing. Mel Brooks himself reportedly had to be removed from the set on multiple occasions because his own laughter was being picked up by the audio equipment. The man directing the film could not watch Gene Wilder work without losing his composure. But there is a dimension to Wilder's contribution that goes beyond what appeared on screen, and this is the part that has been most consistently overlooked by those who analyze Blazing Saddles. During the production, while navigating the ordinary chaos of a film shoot that was anything but ordinary, Wilder was also serving as an unofficial emotional anchor for the entire cast and crew. Those who worked alongside him during that period describe a man who was calm without being distant, generous without being showy about it. He gave notes between takes not as a senior performer asserting hierarchy, but as a collaborator genuinely invested in the quality of what they were all making together. He listened. He steadied people. In a production that was operating under real pressure, managing studio anxiety, creative tensions, and the memory of a chaotic opening day that had derailed their original casting, Wilder was the person who kept the room grounded. Some crew members have described him as the film's unofficial director of tone, a person who helped everyone understand, through example rather than instruction, how seriously they should be taking what was also genuinely funny material. Brooks brought the vision and the volcanic creative energy. Wilder brought the weather, steady and reliable and easy to work in. And then there is the story that links Blazing Saddles to one of the other great comedies of that era, because during breaks in filming, Wilder was quietly nurturing an idea that would eventually become Young Frankenstein. The concept grew out of casual conversations between takes, a question he kept turning over: what would it mean for the descendant of a famous monster maker to want nothing to do with that legacy? He raised it with Brooks almost as an aside, not as a formal pitch but as a thought he found interesting. Brooks was not immediately captivated. He was deep in the trenches of a film that was already demanding everything he had. But Wilder did not drop the idea. He wrote a draft, on his own initiative, without a contract or a guarantee, simply because he believed in it enough to do the work. When Brooks eventually read it, his reaction changed entirely, and within a short time what had been a passing thought between two colleagues on a chaotic Western movie set had become the foundation for a horror comedy that would enter the permanent canon of American film. This is who Gene Wilder was, both on screen and off. Someone who did the work quietly and thoroughly, who did not need an audience for his best efforts, and who trusted that quality, applied with patience, would eventually be recognized. There is one more dimension to Wilder's contribution to Blazing Saddles that deserves to be named directly, and that is the role he played in defending the film's most controversial content when studio executives tried to sand its edges down. Warner Brothers was deeply uncomfortable with the film's racial satire, its language, its refusal to soften the portrayal of American racism into something more palatable. Memos circulated calling for toned-down language, altered scenes, and a generally less confrontational approach to the material. Brooks fought back, but Wilder fought alongside him. Not loudly, not with public statements or dramatic confrontations, but in the private meetings and conversations where these decisions were actually made. He understood that the film's power came precisely from its willingness to make people uncomfortable, that satire which avoids offense is not satire at all but merely politeness wearing a costume. He backed Brooks on the scenes that the studio most wanted to cut, lending his credibility as a respected performer to the argument that the film needed to be exactly as bold as it was. That quiet advocacy helped preserve what Blazing Saddles actually is. A movie willing to say things that made its own studio nervous. A comedy brave enough to trust its audience with ugliness dressed up as laughter. Without Wilder's support in those conversations, some of the film's most essential moments might have ended up on the cutting room floor, and the version of the movie that has endured for 50 years might have been something considerably smaller. What Gene Wilder finally revealed, through years of interviews and reflections and through the unmistakable evidence of the performance itself, is something deceptively simple. He believed that the funniest characters are the ones who are hurting. He believed that comedy is not a vacation from human emotion but a vehicle for it. He believed that restraint, properly applied, is not a limitation but a superpower. The Waco Kid is not a comedic character who happens to have some depth. He is a deeply damaged human being who happens to exist inside a comedy, and the distinction matters enormously. Wilder never let you forget that the kid had a life before the movie started, a past that cost him something real, a wound that never fully healed. He carried that knowledge in every scene, in the pauses, in the eyes, in the particular quality of exhaustion that never quite left his face even when he was delivering a perfectly timed line. That is the thing most fans never fully figured out about Blazing Saddles. The movie works, 50 years later, not just because it is audacious and hilarious and historically significant, but because one of its central performances is genuinely moving. Gene Wilder, the quietest person on that noisy set, turned out to be the reason the noise meant something. He hid in plain sight. And that, in the end, was the whole point.